Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. She cheated while I was battling cancer. It's a sentence that feels like it belongs to someone else, a headline you scroll past with a sympathetic wince before moving on with your day. It's not supposed to be your reality, not the title of the chapter of your life where you're already fighting for every breath, for every sunrise. But here I am, the unwilling protagonist in a story I never wanted to be a part of. The diagnosis was a punch to the gut, a seismic shock that reordered my entire universe in an instant. Stage 3. The words echoed in the sterile white room, each syllable a hammer blow against the fragile walls of the life I had so carefully constructed with Sarah. We had been together for a decade, married for 7, and in that time, she had become my everything, my confidant, my partner in crime, the steady hand that I could always reach for in the dark. Or so I thought. The initial days after the diagnosis were a blur of appointments, tests, and the suffocating weight of uncertainty. The fear was a constant companion, a cold, heavy presence in the pit of my stomach that never truly went away. I remember looking at Sarah, at her beautiful, tear-streaked face, and thinking that as long as I had her by my side, I could get through anything. Her promises of unwavering support were the life raft I clung to in a sea of terror. She would be there for every chemo session, every doctor's visit, every sleepless night. We would fight this together, she said, and I believed her. I had to. The first round of chemo was brutal. It stripped me of my energy, my appetite, and my dignity. I was a ghost of the man I once was, a pale, nauseous creature tethered to an IV pole. Sarah was there, just as she had promised, holding my hand, her touch a comforting anchor in the storm of sickness and despair. She would read to me, her voice a soothing melody that helped to drown out the incessant beeping of the machines and the gnawing anxiety in my own mind. She would bring me bland but nourishing soups that she had made herself, her efforts a testament to her love and dedication. In those early weeks, she was my angel, my warrior, my everything. But then, something shifted. It was subtle at first, a slight change in the atmosphere between us, a new distance in her eyes. The late nights at the office started to become more frequent. She was working on a big project, she said, a demanding new client that required all of her attention. I was too weak, too consumed by my own battle to question it. I was grateful for her career, for the stability it provided while I was unable to work. I trusted her completely. The texts started to come in at odd hours, met with a quick smile and a hurried tap-tap-tapping of her thumbs. When I would ask who it was, she would dismiss it with a wave of her hand. "Just work, honey. You know how it is." And I did, or at least I thought I did. I had been that ambitious professional once, the one who was always tethered to their phone, always chasing the next deadline. So I let it go, chalking it up to the pressures of her job and the stress of my illness. The physical intimacy between us had, of course, dwindled. The chemo had ravaged my body, leaving me with little desire for anything other than sleep. But it was more than that. The casual touches, the lingering hugs, the stolen kisses in the kitchen, they all but disappeared. When I would reach for her in the night, seeking the simple comfort of her warmth, she would pull away, mumbling something about needing her space, about being a light sleeper. I told myself it was the stress, that she was just as overwhelmed as I was, that she was coping in her own way. The signs were all there, a constellation of red flags that I was too blind, too sick, too trusting to see. I was so focused on my own mortality, on the war being waged within my own cells, that I couldn't comprehend the possibility of a betrayal from the one person I thought I could count on for anything. The thought that she could be finding comfort in the arms of another man while I was fighting for my life was simply unfathomable. It was a betrayal so profound, so monstrous, that it didn't even register as a possibility in my chemo-addled brain. Looking back now, the clarity is agonizing. I can see the moments, the tiny cracks in the foundation of our marriage that I had ignored, the lies I had willingly swallowed because the truth was too painful to contemplate. The colleague she mentioned more and more often, Mark, the one with the wicked sense of humor and the brilliant mind. The team dinners that stretched late into the night, the weekend retreats that she insisted were mandatory. I remember her coming home one night, her cheeks flushed, her eyes sparkling with a light I hadn't seen in months. I had naively thought that perhaps she was finally feeling a bit of her old self again, that the burden of my illness was starting to lift, if only for a moment. The truth was far more cruel. She wasn't happy for us. She was happy for them. The discovery came on a particularly bad day. I had just finished my 3rd round of chemo, and the side effects were hitting me harder than ever. I was weak, in pain, and utterly miserable. Sarah had gone out for a girls' night, a much-needed break that I had encouraged her to take. I was trying to find a movie to watch on her laptop, something to distract me from the relentless nausea, when I saw it. An email notification popped up in the corner of the screen, a message from Mark. The subject line was innocent enough, project update, but the preview of the message was anything but. "Can't stop thinking about last night," it read. My heart stopped. The world around me seemed to tilt on its axis. I clicked on the email, my hand trembling so violently that it was hard to control the mouse. And there it was, in black and white, a conversation that laid bare the full extent of her betrayal, a future that was contingent on me not making it. The words blurred through my tears, each one a fresh stab to my already wounded heart. It wasn't just a physical affair. It was a deep, emotional connection that had been blossoming while I was withering away. He had been the one she turned to for comfort, for support, for the intimacy that she no longer shared with me. He was the one who was getting the best of her, while I was left with the dregs, the weary caregiver who was just going through the motions. The pain was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was a physical ache in my chest, a crushing weight that made it hard to breathe. It was a raw, primal scream of anguish that was trapped in my throat. It was the sickening realization that the life I had been fighting so hard to get back to was a lie. The woman I loved, the woman I had built my world around, had not only abandoned me in my darkest hour, but she had actively chosen to deceive me, to wound me in the most cruel and unforgivable way. The irony was almost comical in its cruelty. Here I was, battling a disease that was trying to kill me from the inside out, and the one person who was supposed to be my partner in that fight was poisoning me from the outside in. The cancer was a physical threat, a known enemy that I could fight with medicine and grit. But this betrayal was a cancer of the soul, a malignancy that attacked the very core of my being, my ability to trust, to love, to believe in anything good. I sat there for hours, the laptop open in front of me, the damning words burning into my retinas. I reread the emails, each one a fresh wave of nausea and despair. I scrolled through their chat history, a timeline of their secret love affair that ran parallel to my own agonizing journey through cancer treatment. The dates were a cruel reminder of my own suffering. The night they had first slept together was the same night I had been admitted to the hospital with a fever, my immune system so compromised that a common cold could have killed me. The weekend they had spent at a romantic getaway in the mountains was the same weekend I had been so weak that I couldn't even make it to the bathroom on my own. The love poems he had written her were a stark contrast to the medical reports that detailed the steady decline of my own body. The betrayal was so complete, so all-encompassing, that it was hard to wrap my mind around it. It was a double blow, a 1-2 punch of fate that left me reeling. On one hand, I was facing my own mortality, the very real possibility that I might not live to see another year. On the other hand, I was grappling with the fact that the person I had pledged my life to had broken our vows in the most egregious way possible. It was a cruel and unusual punishment, a form of torture that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. The question that echoed in the silence of our empty home was, what now? How do you confront the person you love with a betrayal so deep that it threatens to shatter the very foundations of your shared existence? How do you find the strength to fight for your life when the person who is supposed to be your reason for living is the one who is causing you the most pain? And the most agonizing question of all, can you ever forgive someone who cheated on you while you were battling cancer? Is there a path back from a betrayal that is so inextricably linked to the most vulnerable and terrifying experience of your life? These are the questions that haunt me, that keep me awake at night, that make the physical pain of the cancer seem almost manageable in comparison. This is my story, the story of a man who was fighting for his life on two fronts, against a disease that was ravaging his body and a betrayal that was destroying his soul. It's a story about the fragility of love, the cruelty of fate, and the impossible choices that we are sometimes forced to make. It's a story that I am still living, a story that I don't know how to end. But it's a story that needs to be told, because in the telling, perhaps there is a glimmer of hope, a chance for understanding, a path towards healing. Or perhaps there is just the raw, unvarnished truth of a heart that has been broken in two, a life that has been irrevocably changed, and a future that is more uncertain than ever. The house was silent, but my mind was a cacophony of rage, grief, and disbelief. Every object in our home, every photograph on the wall, every piece of furniture we had chosen together was now a monument to a life that had been a lie. The wedding album on the coffee table, filled with pictures of a smiling, hopeful couple, felt like a cruel joke. The vows we had exchanged, promises of love and fidelity in sickness and in health, were now just empty words, their meaning hollowed out by her deception. I replayed our conversations over and over in my head, searching for the clues I had missed, the moments when her mask had slipped. Her feigned concern, her tired sighs, her excuses for being distant, they all took on a new, sinister meaning. The stress she had complained about was not the stress of being a caregiver. It was the stress of living a double life. The exhaustion in her eyes was not from sleepless nights worrying about me. It was from the energy she was expending on her affair. The thought of her leaving my bedside, leaving the shell of the man she had promised to love, to go and be with him, was a torment that played on a loop in my mind. I imagined her laughing with him, touching him, sharing a world that was vibrant and alive, while I was trapped in a gray, sterile existence of pain and fear. The contrast was a physical blow, a fresh wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the chemo. When she finally came home a few hours later, her face was flushed, her eyes bright. She was humming a cheerful tune, a stark contrast to the funereal silence that had filled the house in her absence. She leaned in to kiss me, a perfunctory peck on the cheek, and I flinched, my body recoiling from her touch as if she were made of fire. She looked at me, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with a concern that I now knew was a lie. I wanted to scream, to rage, to throw the laptop at her and watch the screen shatter, just like she had shattered my world. But I was too weak, too drained, too utterly broken. The words wouldn't come. I just stared at her, my eyes welling up with tears, a silent accusation that she couldn't or wouldn't understand. The confrontation, when it finally came, was not the explosive, dramatic scene I had imagined. It was a quiet, almost pathetic affair, a reflection of my own diminished state. I showed her the emails, my hand shaking as I pointed to the screen. I watched her face as she read the words, her expression shifting from confusion to shock and finally to a grudging, tearful admission of guilt. Her excuses were a pathetic litany of cliches. She was lonely, she said. She was scared. The cancer had changed everything. She felt like she was losing me, and she had needed someone to lean on. He was just a friend at first, she insisted, someone to talk to, someone who understood. But then it had become something more, a mistake that she had never intended to happen. A mistake. The word was a dagger to my heart. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk on the way home. A mistake is taking a wrong turn on the highway. A systematic, calculated betrayal that spans months, a betrayal that takes place while your husband is fighting for his life, is not a mistake. It's a choice. It's a series of choices made day after day to lie, to deceive, to inflict a wound so deep that it may never heal. Her tears felt like a performance, a well-rehearsed act of contrition that was designed to elicit my sympathy, to make me the bad guy if I didn't immediately forgive her. But I was numb. The pain was so immense, so all-consuming, that there was no room for any other emotion. I asked her to leave, my voice a hoarse whisper. She protested, she begged, she promised to end it, to do whatever it took to make things right. But her words were just noise, a meaningless static that couldn't penetrate the wall of my grief. I needed her to be gone. I needed to be alone with my pain, to try and make sense of a world that no longer made any sense at all. The days that followed were a living hell. I was in the middle of my chemo cycle, at my most vulnerable, and I was completely alone. My friends and family, who had been a source of so much support, were now a source of shame. How could I tell them that my wife, the woman they all admired for her strength and devotion, had been cheating on me? How could I expose the sordid, ugly truth of my lie of a marriage? So I lied. I told them that Sarah had to go on an emergency work trip, that she would be back in a few weeks. The lie was a bitter pill to swallow, a fresh layer of deception on top of the already suffocating weight of her betrayal. I was protecting her, even in my anger, because I couldn't bear the thought of the pity, the judgment, the well-meaning but ultimately useless advice that would inevitably follow. Caring for myself was a struggle. The simple tasks of daily life, making a meal, taking my medication, getting to my appointments, became monumental challenges. I was so weak that I could barely stand, and the emotional turmoil had sapped me of any will to even try. There were days when I didn't eat, when I didn't get out of bed, when I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, the tears streaming down my face, wishing that the cancer would just take me, that it would all be over. The days that followed were a living hell. I was in the middle of my chemo cycle, at my most vulnerable, and I was completely alone. My friends and family, who had been a source of so much support, were now a source of shame. How could I tell them that my wife, the woman they all admired for her strength and devotion, had been cheating on me? How could I expose the sordid, ugly truth of my lie of a marriage? So I lied. I told them that Sarah had to go on an emergency work trip, that she would be back in a few weeks. The lie was a bitter pill to swallow, a fresh layer of deception on top of the already suffocating weight of her betrayal. I was protecting her, even in my anger, because I couldn't bear the thought of the pity, the judgment, the well-meaning but ultimately useless advice that would inevitably follow. Caring for myself was a struggle. The simple tasks of daily life, making a meal, taking my medication, getting to my appointments, became monumental challenges. I was so weak that I could barely stand, and the emotional turmoil had sapped me of any will to even try. There were days when I didn't eat, when I didn't get out of bed, when I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, the tears streaming down my face, wishing that the cancer would just take me, that it would all be over. The loneliness was a physical presence, a suffocating blanket that I couldn't escape. The house, once a sanctuary of love and comfort, was now a prison of painful memories. Every room held a ghost, a reminder of a life that was gone forever. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breaths and the occasional gut-wrenching sob. I started to see a therapist, a kind, compassionate woman who specialized in counseling cancer patients and their families. She was the first person I told the truth to, the whole, ugly, unvarnished truth. The words tumbled out of me, a torrent of pain and anger and confusion that I had been holding in for so long. She listened without judgment, her presence a steady anchor in the storm of my emotions. She helped me to understand that my feelings were valid, that my anger was justified, that my grief was a natural response to a profound trauma. She taught me coping mechanisms, ways to manage the overwhelming waves of emotion that threatened to drown me. She encouraged me to focus on my own healing, both physical and emotional, to put myself first for the first time in a long time. The therapy was a lifeline, but it couldn't erase the pain. The betrayal had left an indelible scar on my soul, a wound that was just as real, just as painful as the cancer that was ravaging my body. I was diagnosed with depression, a common side effect of both cancer and infidelity. The doctor prescribed antidepressants, another pill to add to the already overwhelming cocktail of medications I was taking. The irony was not lost on me. I was taking pills to fight the cancer, pills to fight the nausea, pills to fight the pain, and now pills to fight the despair that my wife's actions had plunged me into. My life had become a series of chemical interventions, a desperate attempt to hold myself together, to keep from completely falling apart. I had to make a decision about our marriage, a decision that felt impossible to make. Part of me wanted to end it, to cut her out of my life completely, to move on and never look back. But another part of me, a small, foolish, hopeful part, still loved her. I loved the woman she had been, the woman I had married, the woman I had thought I would spend the rest of my life with. I missed her, her laughter, her presence, the simple comfort of knowing she was there. And then there was the practical side of things. A divorce would be a messy, expensive, emotionally draining process, a battle that I simply didn't have the strength to fight. And what about the future? If I survived the cancer, would I be able to start over, to trust someone again, to build a new life from the ashes of the old one? The thought was terrifying. The question of forgiveness was a constant presence in my mind, a riddle that I couldn't solve. How do you forgive a betrayal of this magnitude? How do you move past a wound that is so deep, so inextricably linked to the most traumatic experience of your life? Is forgiveness even possible? Or is it a naive, idealistic notion that has no place in the harsh reality of my situation? I read books on the subject, articles, forums, anything I could get my hands on. I learned that forgiveness is not about condoning the other person's actions. It's not about forgetting the pain. It's about letting go of the anger, the resentment, the desire for revenge. It's about freeing yourself from the prison of your own bitterness. It's a gift you give to yourself, not to the person who hurt you. It sounded good in theory, but in practice, it felt like an insurmountable task. The anger was a fire in my belly, a righteous fury that kept me going on the days when I wanted to give up. The resentment was a shield, a protective wall that I had built around my broken heart. Letting go of those things felt like letting her off the hook, like saying that what she had done was okay. And it wasn't okay. It was a monstrous, unforgivable act of cruelty that had changed me forever. I was at a crossroads, a point of no return.
I could choose the path of anger and bitterness, a path that would likely consume me, that would poison any chance I had at a future happiness. Or I could choose the path of forgiveness, a path that was fraught with uncertainty, that would require a strength I wasn't sure I possessed. The choice was mine, and it was a choice that would define the rest of my life, however long that might be. The weight of that decision was immense, a burden that was almost as heavy as the cancer itself. It was a battle for my soul, a fight for the man I wanted to be, a struggle to find a way to live with the ghosts of the past without letting them destroy my future. And in the midst of it all, the cancer was still there, a ticking clock that reminded me that my time was limited, that I didn't have the luxury of years to figure things out. I had to make a choice, and I had to make it soon. But how do you choose between two impossible options? How do you find the right path when you are lost in a forest of pain and confusion? These were the questions that haunted me, the questions that I was still struggling to answer. The journey was far from over. In fact, it felt like it had just begun. And the road ahead was dark and uncertain and filled with a pain that I was still learning how to bear. But I had to keep going. I had to keep fighting. For my life, for my sanity, for the chance to one day find a peace that had been so cruelly stolen from me. The question of whether or not to forgive her was not just about her. It was about me. It was about whether I was going to let her betrayal define me or whether I was going to rise above it, to find a way to heal, to find a way to live again. And in the end, that was the only question that truly mattered. The weeks that followed were a blur of sterile hospital rooms, the rhythmic beeping of machines a constant soundtrack to my life. Each round of chemotherapy felt like a descent into a deeper circle of hell, my body a battlefield where my own cells were the enemy. The physical toll was immense, but it was the emotional desolation that truly threatened to break me. Sarah and I were in a strange limbo, our communication reduced to stilted, practical conversations about bills and my treatment schedule. She had moved out, at my request, and was staying with a friend, but her presence lingered in the house like a ghost, a constant reminder of the life we had lost. She would call, her voice thick with a remorse that I couldn't bring myself to believe was genuine, and I would let the calls go to voicemail, the sound of her voice a fresh twist of the knife in my already wounded heart. The therapy sessions were my only lifeline, the one place where I could be completely honest about the maelstrom of emotions that was raging inside of me. My therapist, a woman of infinite patience and wisdom, helped me to see that my anger was a secondary emotion, a shield that was protecting me from the raw, unbearable pain of my grief. Grief for the loss of my wife, the loss of my marriage, the loss of the future I had thought we would have together. Grief for the loss of my own innocence, my ability to trust, my belief in the inherent goodness of the people I loved. She encouraged me to allow myself to feel the pain, to sit with it, to acknowledge its presence without letting it consume me. It was a terrifying prospect, like willingly walking into a fire, but I knew that it was the only way to heal. I had to go through the pain, not around it. The physical battle with the cancer was a brutal, relentless slog. There were days when the nausea was so debilitating that I couldn't keep anything down. Days when the fatigue was so profound that I felt like I was moving through quicksand. Days when the pain in my bones was so intense that it made me want to scream. But in a strange way, the physical suffering was a welcome distraction from the emotional agony. It was a tangible, measurable pain, a pain that I could fight with medication and rest. The pain of her betrayal was a different kind of monster, an insidious, shapeless thing that had no cure, no easy fix. It was a wound that festered in the darkness, a wound that was constantly being reopened by the memories, the what-ifs, the why-nots.
My friends and family, bless their hearts, did their best to support me, but there was a limit to their understanding. They could see the physical toll the cancer was taking on me, but they couldn't see the invisible wounds of my broken heart. I was still hiding the truth from most of them, the shame of her infidelity, a heavy cloak that I couldn't bring myself to shed. The loneliness was a constant companion, a hollow ache in my chest that never went away. I was surrounded by people who loved me, but I had never felt more alone. The one person I wanted to share my fears with, the one person whose hand I wanted to hold in the dark, was the one person who had caused me the most pain. The irony was a bitter pill that I was forced to swallow every day. There was a turning point, a moment of clarity that came in the dead of night, during a particularly bad bout of insomnia. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of angry, resentful thoughts. I was replaying the scene of our confrontation over and over again, dissecting every word, every tear, every pathetic excuse. The anger was a familiar, almost comforting presence, a fire that kept the cold, hard reality of my situation at bay. But then, for the first time, I allowed myself to look beyond the anger, to see the fear that was lurking beneath it. The fear of dying alone. The fear of never being able to trust anyone again. The fear of being so broken that I would never be able to put the pieces of myself back together. And in that moment, I realized that my anger was not hurting her, it was hurting me. It was a poison that I was willingly drinking every day, a cancer of the soul that was just as deadly as the cancer in my body.
It was a prison that I had built for myself, a prison of bitterness and resentment that was keeping me from healing, from moving on, from living what was left of my life. I knew then that I had to forgive her, not for her, but for me. It was not about absolving her of her guilt or condoning her actions or even reconciling with her. It was about letting go of the anger, the hatred, the desire for revenge. It was about choosing to live in the present, not in the past. It was about reclaiming my own power, my own peace of mind, my own future. The decision was a weight off my shoulders, a glimmer of light in the darkness. It was not a magic wand that would instantly heal all my wounds, but it was a start. It was a conscious choice to take control of my own emotional well-being, to refuse to be a victim of her betrayal any longer. I called her the next day, my voice steady, my heart surprisingly calm. I told her that I forgave her. She was silent for a long moment, and then she broke down, a torrent of sobs that I knew, for the first time, were genuine. She thanked me over and over again, her voice thick with a gratitude that I could finally believe. I told her that my forgiveness was not a promise of reconciliation, that I still needed time, that I didn't know what the future held for us. But I also told her that I was willing to try, to see if there was anything left to salvage from the wreckage of our marriage. It was a long shot, a gamble, but it was a gamble that I was willing to take. The path to forgiveness was not a straight line. There were days when the anger would come roaring back, when the pain would be as fresh as it was on the day I had discovered our affair. There were days when I would doubt my decision, when I would wonder if I was being a fool, if I was setting myself up for more heartbreak. But I would always come back to the same realization, that forgiveness was the only way to heal, the only way to find peace, the only way to move forward. We started going to counseling together, our sessions a raw, painful, but ultimately cathartic exploration of our broken marriage. We talked about the years of neglect, the unspoken resentments, the slow, insidious erosion of our intimacy that had led to her affair. I learned that while her affair was her choice, her responsibility, I was not entirely blameless in the breakdown of our marriage. I had been a distant, emotionally unavailable husband, so focused on my career that I had taken her for granted, that I had failed to see her loneliness, her unhappiness, her desperation for connection.
It was a hard truth to swallow, but it was a truth that I needed to hear. The counseling was a slow, arduous process, a painstaking excavation of years of buried pain. But with each session, we chipped away at the wall that had grown between us. We started to see each other again, not as the villain and the victim, but as two flawed, imperfect human beings who had made terrible mistakes. We started to talk, really talk, for the first time in years. We shared our fears, our dreams, our disappointments. We cried together, we laughed together. We started to remember why we had fallen in love in the first place. It was a long and winding road, but we were on it together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. I was still fighting the cancer, and the battle was far from over. But I was no longer fighting alone. I had a partner by my side, a partner who was just as committed to my healing as I was. We were rebuilding our marriage from the ground up, on a new foundation of honesty, communication, and a hard-won, fragile, but ultimately resilient love. The future was still uncertain, but I was no longer afraid of it. I had faced death, and I had faced betrayal, and I had survived. I was a warrior, a survivor, a man who had been broken and put back together again. I was stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than I had ever been, and I was ready for whatever came next. The question of whether or not to forgive is not a simple one. There is no right or wrong answer. It is a deeply personal journey, a journey that each of us must navigate on our own. But for me, forgiveness was the key that unlocked the door to my own healing, my own peace, my own future. It was the hardest thing I have ever had to do, but it was also the most important. And in the end, it was the only thing that truly mattered. The months that followed were a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, A slow, painstaking reconstruction of a life that had been shattered into a million pieces. The chemotherapy ended, leaving me weak and battered, but alive. The cancer was in remission. The doctor's words a symphony of hope that I had never thought I would hear. But the scars, both physical and emotional, remained, a constant reminder of the battles I had fought and the wounds I had sustained. Our marriage was a work in progress, a fragile tapestry that we were weaving together, thread by painful thread. The counseling sessions continued, a safe space where we could navigate the treacherous terrain of our shared history, a place where we could learn to trust each other again. It was not easy. There were days when the ghost of her affair would rise up between us, a cold, silent presence that threatened to undo all the progress we had made. There were days when the anger and the resentment would resurface, a bitter taste in my mouth that I couldn't wash away. But we learned to talk about it, to acknowledge the pain, to give each other the space and the grace to heal. I learned that forgiveness is not a one-time event. It's a daily choice. It's the choice to let go of the past, to focus on the present, to believe in the possibility of a better future. It's the choice to see the good in the person you love, even when you are still haunted by the memory of their worst. We started to create new memories, to build a new life together, one that was not defined by the cancer or the infidelity. We took a trip to the coast, a place we had always loved, and we walked on the beach for hours, the sound of the waves a soothing balm for our wounded souls. We started a new hobby together, a cooking class, and we learned to laugh again, to find joy in the simple, everyday moments that we had once taken for granted. We were not the same people we had been before the cancer, before the affair. We were changed, irrevocably.
We were more fragile, but we were also more honest, more compassionate, more grateful for the precious gift of each new day. We had been to the brink of hell and back, and we had survived. We had looked into the abyss, and we had chosen to turn away, to walk towards the light. The journey was far from over, and I knew that there would be more challenges ahead. The fear of the cancer returning was a constant, low-grade hum in the background of my life, a shadow that I would have to learn to live with. The scars of her betrayal would always be there, a part of our story, a reminder of the fragility of love and the importance of trust. But I was no longer afraid. I had faced my own mortality, and I had faced the darkest corners of my own heart, and I had emerged on the other side, a survivor. I had learned that true strength is not about never falling. It's about getting back up, again and again, no matter how many times you are knocked down. It's about finding the courage to forgive, the resilience to heal, and the hope to believe in the possibility of a new beginning. The question of whether or not to forgive is a deeply personal one, and there is no right or wrong answer. For some, the betrayal is too great, the wound too deep, the trust too shattered to ever be repaired, and that is a valid choice, a choice that must be respected. But for me, forgiveness was the only path to peace, the only way to reclaim my own life, my own happiness, my own future. It was not about forgetting the past. It was about refusing to let the past define me. It was about choosing love over hate, hope over despair, life over a slow, bitter death of the soul. My story is not a fairy tale. It is not a story of a perfect marriage, or a perfect forgiveness, or a perfect happily ever after. It is a story of two flawed, imperfect human beings who were brought to their knees by a perfect storm of tragedy and betrayal, and who, against all odds, found a way to stand up again, together. It is a story of the messy, complicated, and often painful reality of love, loss, and redemption. It is a story that I am still living, a story that I will continue to write, one day at a time, with a heart that is scarred but not broken, a spirit that is wounded but not defeated, and a hope that is fragile but ultimately unbreakable. I have learned that life is not about the hand you are dealt. It's about how you play it. It's about finding the strength to face the darkness and the courage to search for the light, even when it seems like there is none to be found. It's about learning to forgive,
Not because the other person deserves it, but because you deserve to be free. It's about choosing to live, to love, to hope, even in the face of the most unimaginable pain. And in the end, that is the only choice that truly matters. Before you leave, let me know, what was the toughest lesson you learned about trust? Share it below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Reddit Whispers for more stories like this one.